Purposes, the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition.
Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in House Report number 112-540, offered by Mr. Rush of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while gas prices have subsided over the past few months, Americans are still very concerned about the issue of jobs and high unemployment. In my district and in the African American community in general, joblessness is far higher than the national average, with some communities experiencing unemployment rates of up to 50%. Yet, even with these staggering figures, we're here today debating a bill that will do absolutely nothing to address this critical issue that the American people are facing. Nada, ditto, zero will it do. Mr. Speaker, the House will only be in session a little over 20 more days before we recess in August. And after that, this House will barely be in session until after the November election. During this limited time, we should be focusing our attention on legislation that will create jobs and move America forward towards a smarter energy future that is less vulnerable to the whims of the world's oil market. However, there is nothing in this bill, in H.R. 4480, that will do anything to address the issues most important to the American people. Neither jobs nor gas prices are dealt with in this bill. Mr. Speaker, my amendment, the amendment that I'm offering today, gets right to the heart of the matter and simply states, not later than 90 days after the date of enactment of this act, the administrator of the Energy Information Administration should make a determination as to whether implementation of this act is projected to lower gasoline prices or create jobs within the United States within a period of 10 years. That's what my amendment says clearly, simply, concisely. However, if the administrator of the EIA determines that implementation of this act is not projected to lower prices or create jobs in 10 years, then the most egregious provisions of this bill, sections 205 and 206, which attack existing Clean Air Act protections, will sunset and cease to be in effect very clearly. Mr. Speaker, provisions in this bill, such as Title II, the Gasoline Regulations Act, use the backdrop of high unemployment and fluctuating gas prices as a ruse to once again attack the EPA and the Clean Air Act without doing a single thing to actually reduce the cost that Americans are paying at the pump or to deliver more jobs to the American people. Mr. Speaker, Congress should not remove long-standing Clean Air Act requirements for EPA to set ambient air quality standards at the level necessary to protect human health. Nor should the majority attempt to block and delay several EPA air quality and public health provisions under the guise of falsely claiming that these attacks on EPA will actually create jobs or reduce gas prices. Time and time again over the past year and a half, this Congress, under the majority party's leadership, has voted to roll back provisions of the Clean Air Act. Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues to vote for the Rush Amendment. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Seek recognition in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to tell a little bit of a story. I grew up, live in a very small town in the eastern plains of Colorado. There's about 3,000 people that live in this small town, and when I was growing up, there was a couple, a mother-daughter that lived across the street from where I was growing up in a little home, and they had an older car, and in this small town, the grocery stores, gosh, it can't be more than 4 blocks away. But when they went to the grocery store, they walked, and as the years went by and the mother got older, they still walked to the grocery store. In the winter, a lot of times they walked. In the summer, they walked. And I remember asking them one time, you know, they have a car. How come they're not driving? Just 4 blocks away. And as she got older and more difficult to walk, her response was, because we can't afford the gas. That's 4 blocks of driving. Can't use much gasoline. But the fact is, the price of gas mattered to that family. Made the difference of getting groceries, putting food on the table. We talk about people's ability to afford health care. If you're left with the option of getting to work or buying health care insurance, what are you going to do? What choice are you going to make? By making sure that we have abundant, affordable energy, we're making sure that families can make ends meet easier, that they can make those choices to go see the doctor when they need to. Because high prices of energy certainly impact the ability of families to lift themselves out of poverty, to make sure that they are improving their own lives. Your amendment would stop the look that we are asking to take at what regulations do when it comes to the price of gasoline, when it comes to the price of energy. Nothing in this bill prevents the EPA from developing rules on their current schedule. But it does say we need to understand the impact that they are going to have on the price of gasoline. Because I bet those neighbors of mine are very interested in what government is doing to increase the cost of them getting to the grocery store or not. And maybe they could drive when it's cold outside. I'd be happy to yield.
I'm so glad that you used the story and told the story of your neighbor, because your neighbor is not unlike my neighbors. They're suffering from unemployment. They're suffering from high gas prices. But what confuses me and what's got me astounded is the fact that in this bill, your neighbor, her problems, my neighbor's problems, the problems of all the members of this body, all of our neighbors' problems, our problems, aren't addressed. And all I'm asking for is that if the EIA, a fairly knowledgeable agency, an agency that is respected, if they determine, after looking at the provisions of this bill, and say that this bill will not create one job, this bill doesn't address rising gasoline
Mr. Chairman,
prices.
if I could reclaim my time so I have the ability to close on the amendment.
Well, certainly. I just don't see what it addresses.
Thank you. And I appreciate my colleagues' debate on this. But again, this issue is not about stopping or blocking the EPA from doing it, because they're fully able to develop rules on their current schedule. Nothing prevents them from protecting the public health and the environment as the law requires them to do. Nothing. And so your amendment, though, when you talk about rules affecting gas prices should be delayed until the report is completed because those rules could increase gas prices. That's all we're trying to do. Allowing a single member of this committee, which your amendment would do, to circumvent the analysis would defeat the purpose of the Act. And so gas prices impact, as we know, all parts of our economy. And we need to have multiple experts. But the EIA, which your amendment deals with, doesn't have the expertise in international competitiveness. They don't have the expertise in job impacts or agriculture or health benefits analysis. And again, I think we have just got to be at the point where we let the American people know what's happening to the price of gasoline because of these regulations. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Speaker,
The gentleman from Illinois.
I ask for a roll call vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois will be postponed. Now in order to consider Amendment Number 12, printed in House Report 112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in House Report number 112-540, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Holt, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill before us tonight would elevate energy production above all other uses of public lands in really contradiction of the principles of multiple use under the Federal Land Management and Policy Act. And this would be to the detriment of grazing, hunting, fishing, and other recreation activities. Yet the plan envisioned by the majority's bill does not even require that the Interior Department consider the tens of millions of acres of public lands that oil companies are just sitting on and not using. Right now, oil companies have roughly 25 million acres of public land onshore on which they are not producing oil. Even worse, oil companies are not even beginning drilling activities on the vast majority of these non-producing areas. In fact, last month the Interior Department released a new report which found that oil companies have nearly 21 million acres onshore under lease on which they have not even begun conducting exploration activities. Well over half of the public lands oil companies have under lease onshore are idle. They are warehousing these leases. They are sitting on these leases. My amendment would require that the Secretary reduce the number of non-producing leases as part of the plan for energy development on public lands that would be established under the underlying bill. Before we risk disrupting additional public lands, let's begin by getting the oil and gas industry to use the leases they have. It's simple. No seconds while your plate is still full. It's the height of cynicism that the industry would be squatting on these leases at the same time it is asking us to give them more land that belongs to the Americans. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we've heard this argument and this debate and this issue before. This is nothing but a recycled version of the old use it or lose it argument that we've heard so many times. But this time is disguised at a reduce non-producing leases. This amendment is based on a completely unsubstantiated premise, which is that oil companies are sitting on oil and gas leases, therefore rendering them inactive, at least that's how the claim goes, if they are not diligently drilling for and producing oil. This is important, Mr. Chairman. Use it and lose it is already the law of the land. Why? Because every lease on federal land currently includes a development language requiring moving forward by the energy companies. If a company does not produce within those lease terms, then the lease reverts back to the government. Now keep in mind, picture this. A company is paying money for a lease. And then there are certain conditions in this lease for them to produce in a time period. If they don't produce in that time period, it reverts back to the government. Is that not use it or lose it? That's the law of the land as it is a part of the lease sales. So just because a lease sale is not actively producing, that doesn't mean that there's not work on that lease sale. Leases can be held for up to 7 or 10 years for studies or permitting or even lawsuits slow that process down. In addition, it isn't possible to drill every lease at the same time. Think of leases like home building. A home builder doesn't start every building at home at the same time. You have roofers, you have framers, you have plumbers, you have drywalls, you have electricians, all working at different times, different parts of the house. Oil and natural gas is the same way. You have geologists, drillers, production, permitting, environmental studies. All those things happen in different steps. So the argument that use it or lose it, which is already in place, is something that we should even be debating here, is nonsensical. It ignores the realities of oil and gas, the years of exploring, of drilling and permitting that it takes to bring something to the fore. Not only has the use it and lose it argument failed many times when it's been brought to the floor of this House, but in the House Natural Resources Committee on legislation dealing with this, it lost on a bipartisan vote. And frankly, Mr. Chairman, I suspect if there's a vote called on this, it too will lose on a bipartisan vote. So to encourage that, I would urge my colleagues to reject this amendment, and I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the time remaining on this amendment?
3 minutes.
I'd be pleased to yield 2.5 minutes to the co-author of this amendment, the ranking member, Mr. Markey.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I have a suggestion to succinctly tell the whole story about the tens of millions of acres that oil companies are allowing to sit idle. Fox should create a new TV show for the oil companies holding all these idle wells, and it could be called American Idol, with Exxon and Chevron and BP and all those companies as the contestants. And every week the oil companies can come and sing their sad tune about needing more taxpayer-owned land to drill, even as their lease blocks are left lonely for years at a time and they don't drill at all. ExxonMobil and BP could sing songs like Not Taking Care of Business or Sitting on a Block in the Bay, where the refrain sung by the oil company executives would, of course, be Wasting Time. And Simon Cowell could come back to the show he created so we can all watch as he mocks these companies for their subpar drilling performance. And, of course, in typical fashion for the oil industry, they'll still demand to be advanced to the next round of leasing, even though they're doing nothing. And by the way, in this bill, the Republicans actually have a provision that if the president, because Iran attacked us, deployed 10% of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that we, the American people, would then have to lease 200 million acres, an area the size of Texas, to the oil companies to drill, because the president deployed the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, even though the oil companies already have an area the size of Kentucky in public lands that they are not drilling on. So this whole American Idol thing really plays perfectly into the Republican plan, because right now the oil companies pay $1.50 per year per acre not to drill, while at the same time bleeding that they are being discriminated against, even as the president now has us at the highest rate of oil production in the United States in 18 years, which is a very hard thing for the Republicans to finally come here to the floor and admit. Vote for the Holt Amendment. That is the solution to this problem. Then we'll get America and the oil companies back to work and away from their idle ways, which is hurting the national security of this country.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Washington.
Can I inquire how much time on both sides?
The gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
I'll reserve my time.
Okay. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey. Gentleman has 30 seconds remaining.
Mr. Chairman, let me just repeat. Right now, the oil companies have 25 million acres of public land onshore in which they are not producing. They have 21 million acres of public land onshore under lease on which they are not even conducting exploration activities. I rest my case.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Washington.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, once again to repeat, the nature of the lease sales that companies enter into is use it or lose it. Because if they don't, within the time period of that lease, utilize that for production, they give it back. That's use it or lose it. That's the law right now. But let me respond here in the short time I have about comments that have been made earlier about increased American production. That's true, Mr. Chairman, and I'm glad for that. But the implication of that statement being made by my friends on the other side of the aisle is that it's because of the policies of this administration. Mr. Chairman, nothing could be further from the truth. It takes a while to get land or offshore up to speed and in production, sometimes many years. But what is the reason production is increasing in some areas, and it has been increasing, it's now going down in federal lands, is because of actions of prior administrations. That is never said. It's because of prior administrations' actions. Because the last 2 years of this administration, oil and natural gas production on federal lands has gone down. And finally, the main reason while oil production has increased in this country is because it's happening principally in North Dakota and in West Texas, and it's on private land and or state lands. The federal government and this administration had absolutely nothing to do with the increase of that production. As a matter of fact, I think there are probably some efforts to try to slow that down. But at any rate, I had to make that point, Mr. Chairman. This amendment, again, has been around a few times. I suspect that if a vote is called on it, that it will fail on a bipartisan basis again. I urge rejection, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Chairman, on that I ask a roll call vote.
The gentleman asks for a roll call vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey will be postponed. It's now in order to consider Amendment Number 13, printed in House Report 1112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of myself and Mr. Lewis, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 13, printed in House Report Number 112-540, offered by Mr. Connolly of Virginia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I rise to offer this amendment on behalf of my colleague, Congressman John Lewis. Before I begin, I'd like to invite my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to refer to their pocket constitutions, specifically page 21. There they'll find the First Amendment, which reads, and I quote, "Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances." I may be mistaken, Mr. Chairman, but when we read the Constitution read it aloud here on the floor at the start of this Congress, a bipartisan exercise in which I was privileged to participate, I don't recall there being an asterisk at the end of the First Amendment saying, except, of course, if your petition stands in the way of big oil. Yet the language in this bill creates a brand new $5,000 protest fee for any American citizen to challenge the granting of a drilling lease, right-of-way, or permit. I don't know about my colleagues, but that seems like we're abridging the freedom of speech and the right to petition the government to redress a grievance. Once again, the Republicans in the House are happy to rush by the rights of the public to benefit their big friends in big oil. This is a capricious tax at best on the peaceable right to protest an act of the government that someone believes might harm the environment. Not surprisingly, the bill does not apply a similar protest fee on someone who might want to protest the denial of a drilling lease or permit. One wonders why. Could it be that would be a tax on industry? Mr. Chairman, the Bureau of Land Management objected to this fee in its testimony to the committee on this legislation, citing it as an inappropriate economic barrier to the public to seek judicial review or redress of an agency decision. I agree with that statement, but I don't think it goes far enough. It doesn't fully capture the full ramifications of it. It would trample on the First Amendment rights of the public. So much for the other side's commitment to being strict constructionists when it comes to the Constitution. Mr. Chairman, I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and reject this assault on the Constitution and the First Amendment, and I yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Markey from Massachusetts.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
At this point, I would like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from what? Gentleman from Virginia controls the time. Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise and opt to seek the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman's recognized.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to clarify something. Absolutely nothing in this legislation or this entire legislation takes away the right of people to protest or petition a redress of grievances. That is something that is held sacred, I think, by all Americans, certainly all members of this House. During the oil and natural gas leasing, exploration, and development process, there are over a dozen opportunities for citizens to protest, to appeal, to comment, or to even completely halt energy development on public land. Since the 1990s, however, the use of protests on federal lands has increased by 700% through a considered effort by special interest groups to halt oil and natural gas development on our federal lands. This explosion of protests has crippled the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, offices while they are working to handle the wave of new protests. A formal protest of leasing is a legitimate step in oil and natural gas leasing process. However, and this is something that I think most people recognize, the abuse of protests to halt that development is something I think needs to be addressed. So the $5,000 protest documentation fee in this legislation goes directly then towards helping the BLM process through the onslaught of protests that they are currently being paid by taxpayer dollars. It does not take away anyone's right to protest, nor does it interfere with the nearly 15 ways someone can participate in the government's decision regarding federal energy leasing or development. This provision, as a matter of fact, will ensure that taxpayers' dollars going through the normal process are spent protecting the environment, the planning, and the leasing, and not tied up in processing paperwork related to endless protests filed by special interests with an agenda that one has to conclude is stopping oil and natural gas leasing. And I do want to mention, too, Mr. Chairman, this amendment was also offered in the Natural Resources Committee on the legislation, and it, too, was defeated on a bipartisan basis. And I suspect that if this is brought to the floor, it will probably be beaten on a bipartisan basis again. So I urge rejection of this amendment, and I reserve my time.
First, gentleman from Virginia.
Chairman, I would inquire how much time remains.
The gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I would yield the balance of the time to Mr. Markey from Massachusetts.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Chairman, this provision reminds me of something that the French author Anatole France once said. He said, "The law in its majestic equality forbids the rich as well as the poor to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal bread." So yes, under the bill's petroleum protest poll tax, the rich as well as the poor are charged $5,000 as a fee to protest an oil company drilling plan that could undermine the environment or the safety or the view of a particular individual. But the law is clearly targeted against the poor. So if you are one of the super rich, like, say, Mitt Romney, having to pay a $5,000 fee to protest is nothing. it's less than half of what you offer up when you make a friendly little bet with a friend. Or if you're the Koch brothers and you want to stop the Cape Wind project from blocking your view out on the ocean, that's a small price to pay to be able to undermine a project that you are not happy with. But for everyone else, this is a basic economic discrimination. This $5,000 fee isn't just a toll booth on the highway of justice. It is a brick wall. You know, by contrast, the United States Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, charges $300 to appeal a case. For an American citizen earning minimum wage, it would take 4 months of working full-time and foregoing food and shelter in order to pay this protest fee, which the Republicans want to put on the books. So ordinary people, they're going to have to pay up now if they want to protest. And the environmental justice that has been denied poor people in our country over the last several generations just continues under this. And this is what it's all about, environmental justice. And what you're doing is you're imposing a poll tax, an environmental poll tax, a polluter's poll tax, a petroleum poll tax on ordinary families. And it's just wrong, unnecessary, but oh so obvious in what the agenda is. Not to block the Koch brothers from trying to stop Cape Wind, but rather just an ordinary citizen, but having their day in court where they can make their protests in a way that doesn't bankrupt the family. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman has 2.5 minutes remaining.
Mr. Chairman, I want to point out with this poster behind me, and I know one can't read all of the details here, but this is a process by which somebody goes through a lease process to try to develop some activity on federal lands. This is the process that they go through, which of course is pretty long. Now, I mentioned in my opening remarks that there are 15 different ways there can be a protest made or your voice is heard or whatever in that whole lease process. On the back of me on this chart, that is denoted by the red dots. And you can see all the way along, starting way over to my far right, where right at the start there's places you can have input, and that continues throughout all the way to virtually the end. Now, when you have a whole lot of, a process like this, and I will say it, in many cases the process, some of these red dots are used for frivolous purposes. Well, if they're used for frivolous purposes, there has to be a way, it would seem, in order to mitigate that some way so that the government can do their job and do their work under the law as to those that are trying to lease public lands. That's what simply the fee does, because the fee goes to the agency that this. That means you can ensure, from my point of view at least, that you'll have a process that's fair and open. Nothing is taken away. There are no red dots taken away whatsoever. We're just simply saying there has to be a means in which we finance this process. I think this is a way to do it, and so I would urge rejection of this amendment. And as I mentioned, it had been rejected several times before. It was rejected in committee, and I hope it will be rejected on the House floor. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Gentleman from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, on that matter, on behalf of myself, Mr. Lewis, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment number 14, printed in House Report 1112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nevada seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in House Report number 112-540, offered by Mr. Amodei of Nevada.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Amodei, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for recognizing me on this amendment on this important piece of legislation. The Domestic Energy and Jobs Act, in addition to developing our abundant oil and natural gas reserves, is also important for purposes of recognizing another part of the energy sector, and that is our mineral resources, an often forgotten component of America's economic engine and comparative advantage over other nations is our mineral and, yes, coal production. Minerals and mined materials are the raw ingredients needed by every sector of our economy. This amendment is simple. It would prohibit the Secretary of Interior from moving any aspect of the solid minerals program administered by the Bureau of Land Management and merging it with the Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement, the OSM. This amendment is necessary because currently the administration continues to proceed with plans to combine these two entities despite the fact that it has met with heavy bipartisan resistance and also resistance from stakeholders, including, yes, even environmental groups. Last year, Secretary Salazar announced his intent to combine the OSM and a portion of BLM's solid minerals program through a secretarial order. Appears to be in vogue these days. Executive orders, secretarial orders. The problem missing here is resort to Congress. Previous administrations have looked at this and have concluded in the record that congressional action is needed to do this. So here we are trying to forestall yet another secretarial or executive order that flies in the face of congressional authority. In March of this year, the Department of the Interior indicated a desire to continue to evaluate this. This will result in unnecessary costs to taxpayers as it's duplicative. It flies in the face of previous administrations, but more importantly, OSM should not have responsibility for leasing federal coal. Under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, passed by this House, states are responsible for permitting and the regulation of coal mining and abandoned mine land cleanup. Additionally, Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act expressly prohibits the commingling of employees of any federal agency that promotes the development or use of coal, responsibility of the Solid Minerals Division of the BLM. It's a clear conflict of interest. Finally, OSM does not have offices in all federal western states, and hard rock mining does not fall under their jurisdiction, nor does it have any experience in the broad range of mineral commodities regulated by the BLM. I ask for the Chamber's support of this amendment that would stop the Department of Interior from merging the operations of the BLM and OSM. I thank you for your consideration, and I would like to yield to the Chairman of the Natural Resources Committee.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I think you have a very good amendment, and I support that amendment, and I thank the gentleman for bringing it to the floor, and I yield back to him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Who seeks time in opposition?
I claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. We know that the Republican majority thinks current law governing hard rock mining in this country is about as close to perfect as they can get. And we know that international mining giants like Barrick Gold and Rio Tinto agree with our Republican colleagues. The status quo is really ideal from their perspective. That is because the status quo allows these multinational companies to mine billions of dollars worth of gold, silver, and other minerals on federal lands without paying a dime in royalties. What's not to like if you're a multinational offshore company coming into our country? The law allowing this disgraceful windfall was signed by Ulysses S. Grant in 1872. And there it sits, immune from change, immune from improvement or update for 140 years. What we did not realize was just how far this majority will go to make sure even the smallest corner of the current setup is never, ever changed. The administration has announced plans to consider whether merging some of the functions of the Office of Surface Mining and the Bureau of Land Management might lead to efficiencies and save the American taxpayers some money. The jury is still out on that idea, but we must ensure that we can continue to exercise proper oversight of mining activities on public lands and ensure that American taxpayers and states can continue to receive a proper return on these minerals. A February report to Secretary Salazar recommended that the two agencies stay largely independent of each other. The merger plans have yet to be developed or announced and would likely be limited to money-saving ideas like combining human resource divisions, employee training programs, and fleet management operations. This streamlining could reportedly save as much as $5 million annually of taxpayers' money, something that the GSA perhaps could take as a lesson as to how they should operate. At the very least, the administration deserves the time to fully develop and present a plan that can be debated on its merits. But this amendment says no. This amendment would specifically prohibit the administration from even considering whether aspects of this idea have merit and would save the taxpayers money, which is the goal of the amendment, of the plan that the Department of Interior is considering. Not only do our Republican colleagues reject any and all efforts to bring the federal mining law into the 21st century, or I would even take the 20th century for that matter, but they bristle at the very idea of thinking about ways to better organize the agencies overseeing mining on federal lands. We should let the administration do its job. We should also get serious about ending royalty-free mining on public lands. This amendment really misses the point entirely. We need to be more efficient. We have to save the taxpayers money, and we also have to make sure that these multinationals pay more to mine the minerals of the American people. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I inquire as to how much time I have left?
Gentleman has 2 minutes remaining.
I yield a minute and a half to my colleague from the Buckeye State.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, today I rise in support of the Amodei Amendment that would ensure the Secretary of Interior does not combine the two agencies with competing missions into the same agency. Late last year, the Secretary of the Interior tried to merge the Office of Surface Mining into the Bureau of Land Management after spending months of time and valuable taxpayer dollars to look at the issue and holding multiple public meetings. The Secretary of the Interior realized two things. First, he realized that he didn't have the power to merge the two agencies, and secondly, he realized that it was simply a bad idea. Now there are reports that the Secretary is looking at taking portions of Bureau of Land Management and moving them under the purview of the Office of Surface Mining. The two facts that I just mentioned still hold true today. The Secretary doesn't have the power without it first being authorized by Congress. And the two agencies have competing missions. It simply doesn't make sense to combine the two agencies. During a markup at Natural Resources earlier this year, I offered an amendment similar to this that stopped the Secretary of the Interior from combining the two agencies, and it passed on a voice vote. I would hope that this amendment passes by a similar fashion. I am all for streamlining overlapping government functions and cutting wasteful government spending. However, in this case, there are no overlapping functions or wasteful spending, and for that reason, I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Time has expired. Gentleman from Massachusetts. Gentleman has a minute and a half remaining.
And how much is remaining on the majority?
Gentleman from Nevada has 30 seconds remaining.
I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman from Nevada.
I reserve, Mr. Chairman.
Does this gentleman yield back his time?
Mr. Chairman, I would just say this. The goal of the amendment is to keep from picking up the newspaper in the morning and reading about a secretarial or executive order that has combined two agencies that the record is replete with evidence that the executive branch and the Secretary does not have the authority to. So when we talk about oversight and the proper thing to do in these instances, and when we talk about debated on its merits, as my colleague from the Bay State has indicated, love to do that. That requires that Congress act, not the Secretary of the Interior and not the President of the United States. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Nevada. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from Nevada.
Thank you. On that last question, I would ask that we have a recorded vote.
Recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Nevada will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment number 15, printed in the House Report 112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk, and I rise to claim the time in order to defend it.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in House Report number 112-540, offered by Mr. Markey of Massachusetts.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, and a member opposed to each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you. And I yield myself as much time as I may.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment is quite simple. It prohibits the export of oil and natural gas produced from leases on the public lands of the United States that are going to be authorized under this bill. America's #1 export last year was American fuel. #1. No other product did we export more of last year than the fuel that is produced here in the United States. More than $100 billion in American-made fuels was sent overseas to China, to Morocco, to Singapore, and other countries. This infuriates Americans pulling up to the pump and paying more than $3.50 a gallon to fill up. And not only do oil companies want to continue exporting American fuel, but they are now talking about lifting restrictions on exporting America's crude oil as domestic production continues to increase. Just this week, the president of the American Petroleum Institute announced that exporting America's crude oil should be a serious consideration. Let me say that again. Big Oil is now stating publicly, in no uncertain terms, that they want to be able to export crude oil produced in the United States. Now, earlier, the majority whip said that this bill will make us energy independent. Well, without the Markey Amendment, there is no way that an oil company just won't export the fuel and the natural gas. And now the head of the American Petroleum Institute says Big Oil also wants to start exporting America's crude oil as well. As American men and women are on the ground in the Middle East fighting and dying to protect oil supply lines coming from the Middle East into the United States, Big Oil wants to export oil produced here in America to China, to other countries around the world. That is truly frightening. And it's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Wrong in terms of our relationship with the young men and women who fight for us, who defend us around the world. Big Oil is beholden to shareholder interest only. They do not care about American national security, and they certainly don't like Americans to enjoy low energy prices, which is what's happening right now with natural gas. They want a bigger cut. They want to create a global national gas market and a global price just like they have for oil. That's the plan. And the companies are lining up at the Department of Energy right now to get permits to export American natural gas. 15 applications seeking to export 28% of our current natural gas, American natural gas here in the United States, all around the world. And why do they want to do that? Well, they want to do that even though the Energy Department says it could lead to a 54% increase in the price of natural gas for Americans. They want to do it for a very simple reason. The price of natural gas in Japan right now is 7 times higher than the price of natural gas here in America. American companies want to sell the natural gas to the Japanese rather than to Americans because they can make 7 times as much money. In Europe, it's 4 times as high. They want to just sell the natural gas of America overseas rather than keep the prices low for people, to keep their homes heated, to keep our industries growing. The petrochemical industry, the fertilizer industry, the plastics industry, all those industries dependent upon these fuels. Now, that's good for the oil industry, very bad for the American domestic manufacturing sector, because low-price natural gas is what's fueling the increase in manufacturing all across this country. And so I just totally reject the premise of the majority in allowing for the sale of our oil and gas out of our land across the country. At this point, I am going to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise to claim time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm afraid from at least my reading of the amendment that this displays a lack of understanding regarding existing federal laws and the realities of oil and natural gas market. Because oil produced on federal lands is already subject to the Export Administration Act. In order to export crude oil, a producer would have to apply for authorization from the President. That's the law right now. Currently, no crude oil produced in the United States is exported with the exception of a small quantity that goes to a Canadian refinery. So I just think that what this is, more than anything else, is an effort to make production on federal lands more challenging and thus less valuable. As a matter of fact, that would hurt the economy and American jobs. But there's another aspect to it, and again, it's the way the amendment is written. What about products that are made from oil? And we know there's a vast array of products that are made from oil and natural gas, for that matter. I think of a product that's made in my state. One of the biggest manufacturers in my home state of Washington is Boeing. There was a big fanfare, and in fact, I think a couple of weeks ago, they had their latest product on display down at Reagan National. It's called the 787 Dreamliner, which of course is made of composites. Composites made of natural resources, i.e. oil and natural gas and others. Now the way this amendment is written, because there's no restrictions, that means that Boeing probably could not export 787s. And frankly, their biggest market is in the international market. But let's just not confine it to Boeing. What about other byproducts that we manufacture? One comes to mind because my wife asked if we were using it doing some home repairs this weekend, WD-40, petroleum product. I understand that that company exports a lot of that product overseas. The way this amendment is written, one could assume that that would be restricted. What would that do then to the job market and our economy if we restrict what is result of oil and natural gas to be exported overseas? So I just want to repeat, there are restrictions for crude oil on federal lands. That's existing law. This amendment adds nothing to it. But what I'm concerned about is, I guess, would be the unintended consequence. Let's not get ourselves into a situation where we have to pass a bill before we know what's in it. We've painfully gone through that in this country. So I don't think this amendment is a good amendment, and I urge my colleagues to reject it, and I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts has 30 seconds remaining.
Would it be possible for the chair to recapitulate the time which is now available to the majority and the minority?
The gentleman from Washington has 2 minutes remaining.
Does the gentleman have any other speakers?
I am prepared to close if my friend is prepared to close.
I was prepared to hear the gentleman from Louisiana make some comments, and apparently that's not going to be something that I am going to
We will get that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I am going to, I will then yield myself the final time.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
In summary, Price Waterhouse estimates that U.S. manufacturing companies could employ 1 million more workers if they continue to have low-price natural gas. Exporting natural gas, exporting crude oil, is only going to hurt our domestic economy, except for one industry, the oil industry. American oil production right now is at its highest level since Bill Clinton. Natural gas production at its all-time high ever. And what the American petroleum industry is now saying is we want to start exporting this crude oil, start exporting this natural gas around the planet. Keep American oil and natural gas here in America. Do not export it to other countries It should be for Americans. It should be for American
Gentleman's
companies.
time has expired.
Vote aye on the Markey Amendment.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman's recognized.
And I'll first say I'll urge people to reject the Markey Amendment. Now, I made an observation, and maybe somebody's saying, boy, you're really stretching it if you're going to buy products. And I referenced the way the amendment was written. And the amendment is written where it says, very specifically, all oil and gas. Well, let's see. If a product is made from oil and gas, wouldn't that qualify? So I think this is a very, very serious concern, and once again, it's the unintended potential consequences of this amendment. So I urge rejection of the Markey Amendment, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. Chairman, on that, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. It's now in order to consider amendment number 16, printed in House Report 112-540. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 16, printed in House Report number 112-540, offered by Mr. Landry of Louisiana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 691, the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is very simple. It seeks to improve the environment by ensuring that those states that allow offshore drilling are allowed to keep more of the revenue generated off of their shores. In 2007, Congress passed the historic Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act, or GOMESA. This historic legislation for the first time allowed states to share in the royalties generated from offshore drilling. However, the GOMESA Act only provided 37.5% of the revenue to these states and then capped these states at no more than a collective $500 million per year. Conversely, the Mineral Leasing Act requires the federal government to give 50% of the energy revenue generated on federal lands to states in which it is generated. In Louisiana, we wholly support offshore drilling, but we are proud to supply 80% of our nation's offshore energy. But why should we not share in the funding generated by this drilling? My amendment simply moves offshore royalty sharing more in line with the benefit experienced from onshore states by moving the GOMESA cap from $500 million to $750 million per year. My amendment does not impact onshore producing states. If your state is receiving revenue from onshore energy production now, my amendment does nothing to change that. All the amendment does is move Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, and Alabama a little closer to what those onshore states currently enjoy. This amendment is nearly identical to the amendment that both myself and the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond, offered during consideration of H.R. 3408, the Pioneers Act, of which that amendment passed by bipartisan support of 266 to 159. And I reserve the balance of my time. The gentleman will yield.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I think the gentleman has a good amendment. As he pointed out, it already has passed on a bipartisan basis on the floor, and I think it's worthy to be passed in this instance. So I support the amendment, and I yield back to the gentleman.
I reserve the balance.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you.
For 5 minutes.
I rise to claim the time in opposition to this amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, every day will be Mardi Gras down in Louisiana if the gentleman's amendment is adopted. We, that is all the rest of us in the country, we're already going to be sending $150 billion to these 4 states over the next 60 years, and I don't blame the gentleman for coming back to try to get another bite of the apple, or in this case, another bite of the king cake. But I would say to the gentleman from Louisiana that his state already won the baby in the king cake when the GOMESA giveaway was enacted back in 2006, and you're already entitled to $150 billion worth of revenue coming out of the federal government and heading your way. And so I just think it's time for your region to give a little back to the other 46 states in the Union that didn't benefit from that 2006 giveaway to you. And, you know, no, we're not begrudging that. You know, what's done is done, and you get the $150 billion. But I just think it's time for us to start thinking about the federal deficit, starting to reduce the federal deficit, and starting to spend some of this money that comes in from the revenues, from the drilling, that it helps out the whole country. And so I would just make that case to everyone else that and by the way, if you come from one of those 4 states, vote for the gentleman from Louisiana's amendment. It's a good amendment for you if you come from one of those 4 states, but if you come from one of the other 46 states, you got rocks in your head if you're voting for that amendment, because it's just another $6 billion going from your pockets into the pockets of those 4 states down there, and it just makes no sense at all after the $150 billion we gave them just 6 years ago. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Louisiana.
I would only remind the gentleman from Massachusetts that this is, if you are an environmentalist and if you